So the best way that I think we have is just to listen really deeply to people's stories. Because we don't have the medicalized framework of psychiatry. It hasn't really been translated fully into a medical science yet.
Jonathan, thank you so much for saying yes to this conversation. Very glad to see you and have you here. And it is very fascinating that you are a founder and a CEO of the Ibogaine Clinic, and you're also a psychologist yourself. And I would love to learn more what brought you to Ibogaine and if you had a personal experience with the medicine as well. So what was the journey that bridged you into the psychedelic world and into the founding the whole business around it?
Well, I started, I think, with literature and just being drawn in by books and reading. And there was a particular book that I read in high school called Writing on Drugs. And it was a review of literary history and how substances had informed people's imagination
Yes.
and the stories that they were coming up with. So everything from like Mary Shelley writing Frankenstein while taking laudanum, and to more recent examples of Ken Kesey. And that was around the time when I started to realize the kind of depth of literature, and then could see that this wasn't necessarily just an imaginary thing, but people were actually able to sometimes have these experiences that would bring them into these other worlds. And that's what kind of pulled me in and fascinated me about drugs. And my first drug experience was being prescribed SSRIs, also in high school.
Ooh, early.
And yeah, so I got prescribed that because I was having a hard time at some point, which I consider is relatively normal stuff that I was going through. But I filled out a 9-question questionnaire at the doctor, and I left with a Zoloft prescription. So that was the first time when I experienced being in an altered state. And the worst, I think, was quitting them. I had really severe withdrawal. And not everybody does, but I think some of the literature says about 20% of people do. I had very severe withdrawal, and it lasted for several years. And it wasn't until I took psychedelics for the first time, it was mushrooms, that I really started to kind of come alive again, and to realize that I was real and the world around me was real again, things that I'd lost. And so that's what put me on the track of learning about psychedelics. So Ibogaine came up because at the time, even though I was interested in psychedelics, all of the work around drug policy in Canada, where I'm from, was related with supervised injection sites, harm reduction, in general, drug user rights, and attempting to sort of meet people where they're at to provide humanized healthcare. And so Ibogaine kind of met at the crossroads of these things, where it's a powerful psychedelic with this really old traditional use, but it also really came up, and we kind of know about it because of the work of paraclinicians who were working in drug user unions and in communities of people who use drugs, who are doing kind of peer supports to provide detox, where there wasn't really any other option available. So all those worlds kind of collided, and I ended up really fascinated by Ibogaine, and that's how the story began.
And I've been on your website for MBO, and you have very powerful video that you introduce the whole site with. And can you share more about studying the business in Mexico, and you have a full team there? How long have you guys established it, and what does the whole experience in the clinic look like for your audience?
Well, I went down to Mexico to start working in 2009, and I spent the first number of years apprenticing with people who had been developing clinical protocols and really kind of refining what Ibogaine assisted detox looked like for people coming off of opiates or other drugs. And so it wasn't until more recently that I started my own clinic. And when I came together with my partners, each of us at that point had about 10 years experience in the
Yeah.
field. So it was really
I'm going to say
been
it's a
an
long
easy,
time, 2000.
yeah, we had a lot of opportunity to kind of learn our, craft and be exposed to what people already knew instead
Yeah.
of learning again from scratch. But we started it and we came together because there was this demand from the veteran community in the United States that was really interested in Ibogaine because there were some stories of guys who had really dramatic recoveries in their post-combat retirement. And these guys are suffering with traumatic brain injuries because of being exposed to explosions or just being around high caliber weapon fire that moves the head around in ways that
Brain
causes
injury.
sort of cellular damage. And what they were finding was that Ibogaine was helping with that. So we developed a clinical program to help with them.
How do you know and how do you believe Ibogaine can actually help to recover from addiction, to help the brain injury?
I mean, it's quite complicated because it's doing a lot of things. There's a chemist named Dalibor Samez at Columbia University. He describes it as kind of a matrix pharmacology, where it seems like it doesn't have a very high affinity for one or another target, but it has this low affinity for many targets. So it's almost like combing through our neurology and through the nervous system, and kind of the result is it has this very cohesive systemic kind of effect on the brain and the nervous system. And so that's complex for us compared to the way that we expect drugs to work. So we don't really know. We have some clues, and I think by researching Ibogaine, we'll have this opportunity to learn more about how the brain works and how brain repair occurs. So right now what we can do is we can witness it and we can look at certain activities of Ibogaine in the brain, but we still have a lot to be able to understand exactly what's happening.
And is your clinic or yourself part of current research?
Sure, yeah, we've been working with different university partners. So we collaborated with Stanford University on a fairly large study of 30 Navy SEALs who are coming through our program. And before and after, they were doing fMRIs and EEGs and cognitive tests. And so the research from that has started to come out, and it's had a pretty big impact on bringing Ibogaine to a more general attention of researchers, even amongst people who were already interested in psychedelics. And we're involved with a number of other university partners looking at brain imaging for Ibogaine and opioid detox. We're working on preclinical studies trying to understand Ibogaine's effect on multiple sclerosis and Parkinson's and other kind of conditions that we've seen. But a lot of it, it's trying to understand the effect that Ibogaine has on neurons and on neuroplasticity.
Thank you. What is your program at your clinic look like? Do you have the preparation phase? What is your screening process? And what does the integration look like? It's a lot of questions in one, but let's try.
Sure. So we have a foundational program that is 5 days with us on site. And so that differs if somebody's coming in on heroin or now fentanyl or other kinds of drugs where we have to do a lot more preparation and stabilization before the treatment. So those programs end up being longer. But when those aren't a factor, so for example, with a lot of the military guys that we're working with or first responders or sort of just general public that's coming in, the foundational program is 5 days. And before that, we're doing medical screening. People have to send electrocardiogram and some blood work, and there's a lot of kind of medical tests and just screening questions that we have to make sure that we can give Ibogaine safely. And then they're working with a coach to kind of prepare. We get a lot of people who haven't taken a psychedelic before. They're kind of, in some ways, going in the deep end with Ibogaine. So we prepare people for what to expect and how to sort of plan for afterwards in advance. And then while people are with us for 5 days, they're arriving and going through another medical workup. And then there's in the first day, we try to prepare people sort of psychologically to start focusing on their body and just being present with the process. So we do things like in Mexico, we do a sweat lodge. You know, in Malta, we're doing this kind of like hot cold therapy. But these things to sort of challenge the body and the mind enough to sort of bring you to the present. And then the next day is a lot of prep psychologically for how to sort of navigate inside of the experience. And in addition to that, we teach some breathing techniques and things that you can use while you're in the Ibogaine state. And the treatments begin at night. So we wait until the evening, and people start taking a series of 4 capsules within a 2-hour window. And after about 45 minutes after the first dose, then they go into a room with mats on the floor, and we hook people up to a heart monitor. So the place has the functionality of a medical center with an intensive care unit. Like it has that level of cardiac monitoring, and you know, the medical team is fully prepared to be able to respond to cardiac emergencies. It's sort of like layers of redundancy of safety at that point, but it has that functionality of an ICU, but it doesn't need to look like one at the same time, because we're also going through a very spiritual, very deep, introspective journey. So, you know, the place is candlelit. We actually work with mirrors and sort of use some active meditative tools to sort of enhance the experience at the beginning. But then at some point, the medicine really just asks you to lay down, you know, and to close your eyes or put on some eye shades and turn inward and focus. And that acute period lasts somewhere like 10 to 12 hours. And then there's a long process of recovery afterwards, like another 12 to 24 hours. And so a lot of the rest of the program is just resting and debriefing until people are ready to go home. And then we have some follow-up sessions and remote kind of coaching and groups and stuff that are available to people indefinitely. So that's the scope of it.
Indefinitely, meaning they will be, as they sign up for your program, they will be part of your community indefinitely. And they have access to integration circles, perhaps?
Yeah, those groups are sort of for alumni to be able to come and participate and share. They're sort of focused on the relevance of Ibogaine to the process.
Yeah.
Like, you know, at some point we need to look at other resources and types of communities that we can be involved in. But that's a resource ongoing. Yeah.
Yes, great. And how important is integration phase to this healing process, especially working with addiction or brain injury, in your perspective?
I mean, with Ibogaine, it's pretty massive. I think to some degree, I think of integration like giving time to breathe. Like in one respect, it's recognizing, appreciating, and honoring the fact that more is not necessarily going to be more. Like, we've done this thing and now it's time to see how this lands, right? Like, we're not, this was great, we're going back the next weekend or the weekend after that to try to squeeze more out of it. Integration is really giving it the time that we need to let this experience breathe as fully as possible. And with Ibogaine, that period is quite long. Like there's some studies looking at they call it the critical period of neuroplasticity that different psychedelics produce
different window.
After. You know, but when you're looking at ketamine, it's like 48 hours. Psilocybin and MDMA are 2 weeks. LSD is 3 weeks. And Ibogaine, they had to stop the study before they saw a drop off because that was just the frame of reference. So Ibogaine, we didn't actually see in that model how long the critical period lasts. But people are describing this feeling of openness and kind of ease for quite a while afterwards. And so I think it gives us an opportunity. I think if there's anything that's common to people who are stopping opioid use, or veterans who are dealing with traumatic brain injury, or any of the other things that people are using Ibogaine for, I think it's that it gives us this greater sense of agency. So, like in addiction, it kind of feels like we lose the ability to choose, right? It's not just that we've made this accumulation of bad decisions, it's that at some point we've lost the ability to even choose.
There is something that is stronger than you, right? You can't even make the choice that you logically believe is better. You still choose something that is harming you.
That's right. By the time that you think about, whatever action that you're trying to do or not do, you're already doing it. The train's left the station. Like the momentum is out of your control. So I think what Ibogaine does is it sort of puts us back in that locus of choice over our own actions, and gives us a sort of space, which doesn't even have to be large, but just having like that momentary space to be able to actually make a choice about how we're going to respond to something. So I guess the feeling is being slightly less on autopilot, And so it doesn't mean that necessarily it cures us of who we are, or, all of our bad behaviors. But when we're really trying to make a difficult change, having that choice returned to us, we can actually do quite a lot with that. And I think that's what it does afterwards for people. There's this window of time where we can more easily make those adjustments.
Sounds like a power, you're gaining that inner strength, and like that self-power back, that authentic power that can be completely gone through addictive patterns and addictive behaviors. You mentioning also the other alternative modalities in addition, to your preparation and integration. You mentioned the sweat lodge, you mentioned the hot cold therapy, you mentioned the breath work. From your perspective, can you explain the importance of these modalities that, from my perspective, strengthening the nervous system, but from your perspective, like what's happening, what else is working, what else your clinic is utilizing?
I mean, the way that I think about those things is, well, people are here with us for 5 days. What can we do to deepen their ability to navigate inside of the Ibogaine experience? And I think it's maybe it doesn't have to be the goal to have agency within the experience itself, but I find that when it works, it's so compelling for people to be able to realize that they're not just subject to whatever happens to them when they take something. They don't just need to be bowled over by it completely, but it can be a kind of interaction and a dialogue that they engage in, and that to some degree they can participate in. It's not like you can control where it's going at all, but when you're able to sort of meet with the medicine,
I like what you're saying. We surrender, we can't control, we surrender, but we're still present with the experience.
Yeah, absolutely. I think if we're able to sort of find that very sweet spot, I think it's very enriching. And it's not, I don't think it necessarily is that we need to have that, but that's ultimately what we're practicing afterwards, as well as having that agency to be able to meet life in that way. You know what I mean? To be able to not be just a victim of our circumstances, but to be able to come and meet it. So anyway, within this 5-day period, we can give these amount of tools. I think that they also have the potential to wake people up to the power of breath, or, the power of temperature, and putting ourselves into slightly challenging, very physical meditations once in a while. I think that it and can waken people up to different practices that they can do that are more simple and easier to sort of maintain that state. But I mean, people are with us for 5 days, so all we can do is sort of plant that seed. And that's why we've chosen those things, is because they can be useful even in that brief of a time.
Sure.
Like even just spending an hour focusing on your breath is quite impactful.
100%. Yeah, 100%. And I also believe that psychedelic medicine can be quite intense, especially Ibogaine, right? So if we give people these tools and they have these extra tools to navigate, so the nervous system get stronger and in a way, right? To first we're faced with the medicine and intensity of the medicine on the body, but also emotionally it is so intense, right? So how can I breathe through versus escaping it again, or disconnecting, or just like you said, just to like be there like in a wild dream, you know? How can I learn to interact with what's happening in my universe, if you wish?
Yeah, exactly. So I think one of the things that we encourage people to do is to go in with some questions. So I guess if difficult things come up, there's different ways you could kind of approach it. One is you could just like kind of squirm around, you know what I mean, and just try to get through it.
Exactly.
You know, the other way is you could just sort of come back to being more still and sort of focus on it. And Ibogaine kind of asks us to do that anyways. It kind of feels best to be quite still. So it sort of pushes us in this direction of let's just be still and face what's coming. And so the questions is then to kind of engage with it. Again, we're not just passive observers. We can actually kind of interact. And it's quite common for people to, when they're able to find that point of dialogue with the medicine or with the self, that it opens up a lot of dimensions inside of the experience. So that's what we try to encourage.
We're not a passive observer, we gain capacity to interact. I really like that. That's really great. You're speaking tomorrow at the Psych Symposium. Can you share what is your intention? What are you going to be sharing? What's the topic that you're passionate about?
Yeah. Well, I think that it's a very interesting time for Ibogaine. There's a lot going on. A lot of people are becoming very interested in it. I think it's come into the media landscape in a really powerful way and with really personal stories. And so I'm sharing something I call the neuro-repair imperative, which is, I think, sort of what's underlying some of that push. Like why it's so interesting is because we're starting to see such physical change in the brain and such like the signals that there's repair on a very fundamental and cellular level, that I don't think that we don't have anything else that achieves that. And yet it relates so deeply with so many problems that we're trying to understand better and trying to solve. Like psychiatry is in a crisis because it's attempting to try to ground sort of the symptomatic diagnoses of the DSM into the brain somehow, but it's not able to translate these groupings or whatever, right? So we have the sense that if we can understand what Ibogaine's showing us about the physicality of the mind and the physicality of our mental health, that it has quite a lot to teach us and could help us kind of unlock a deeper understanding of how we work and what we're made of.
Yes, great. I will be there to listen to your talk. And you opening clinic in Malta, is that correct? You're working on the project. How is it going?
Good. Yeah. Ambio has become quite busy, and so one of the problems that we've, even from the beginning when we opened, that we set out to try to solve was what would it look like to try to deliver Ibogaine at scale. Because if that's what's being asked for, is to have greater access to the medicine, what does that look like? You know, and is it possible to do it while still incorporating some of the things that I was mentioning, like the sensitivity about how we hold the experience? You know what I mean? Like, I think the first thought for um, medical professionals or drug developers who haven't seen it from the inside first is that you could just do it in an ICU, you know, and as long as you take care of the heart and people don't die, then you know they'll get some healing out of it. So I think we know more than that already because we've been using it for so many years. So the thought with Ambio has been, can we transform what we've learned from the quote unquote like underground or paraclinical work that happened in all these decades of development, and can we translate that into a scalable model?
What do you mean by scalable? More people in the process, in the ceremony?
What I mean is, you know, when we look at some of the discussions that are going on in the United States, you know, like the state of
Scalable, meaning
Kentucky
more open.
was trying to talk about, could we research this to address the concerns about fallout from the opioid epidemic in the state of Kentucky? We're all of a sudden talking about a scale that exceeds what we're doing in Mexico, let alone all the other states or the rest of the world. So what would it look like to integrate Ibogaine into healthcare systems? Is it possible? And what do we need to know about offering it at that kind of scale? So that's what we've been kind of exploring and honing operationally. And so Malta is kind of an expansion of that, and also an opportunity to bring that to Europe, which hasn't had like a physician-led clinic. It's had Ibogaine work and research going on for decades from the 80s. But to have that kind of larger scale medicalized version of Ibogaine treatment.
Right. Earlier today, I had an interesting conversation with someone who went to go through initiation to Iboga in Gabon, and we did touch on the importance of the ceremony and how important it is, you know, to have the rituals and being part of the community. So here we are talking about medical model of Ibogaine, that is alkaloid out of the Iboga. What is your perspective on the ceremonial approach versus clinical, and how can we, knowing that they are different models, but how can we work on continue to integrate, and do you believe if that's necessary?
I've also been initiated in Gabon in several different traditions. And so when I was mentioning about the mirror, for example, that we use, that's a tool that gets used in Bwiti pretty universally, as far as I've been able to see, like across different traditions. And I think when we started to use it, it was because I could understand it, for example, through the lens of Lacanian psychoanalysis and the significance of the mirror in the formation of our identity, and you know, how that related with the rest of the Ibogaine experience. And there was a framework for me to understand it in a way that wasn't just borrowing the aesthetic. You know what I mean? Like, I think sometimes people will pick up tools without necessarily fully understanding what they are, and so it's also not traditional. Like, that's not, like, if you ask traditional practitioners, they will tell you there's a very deeply thought out scholarly approach to all of the symbolism and everything that's integrated into the ceremony. And so I think if we're going to integrate that, I think we have to also have that level of understanding about what it is that we're doing, rather than just mimicking or
mimicking. Yeah, I appreciate that.
You know, and I think that we need that to be able to offer the guidance through the experience, you know, as people start to confront images in the mirror that are stranger even than what I've seen. We need to have a framework to help to understand and to integrate what that can mean. So yeah, I think that there's so much to learn, and we're doing work with traditional communities in a number of ways, and I think there's a real desire on both sides to try to find ways to integrate the different ways of knowing. And so I think that's
integrate different ways of knowing.
I think that's something that we'll all gradually move towards as it makes sense to do it.
Beautiful. What would be the message that you would want the audience to hear? Like, there are people who would be interested to listen to this, this subjects on Ibogaine, opportunity to calm, heal. What would be the message that you would want to share?
I think that the big thing, there's almost a challenge that we have, for example, with the study we did with Stanford. The veterans that were going through all had these mild traumatic brain injuries from very specific types of combat scenarios that they all shared. But in the study, it shows what happened to their PTSD symptoms and to their depression symptoms, and so I think it almost still does us a disservice that we're using those labels to understand things. Because, for example, I don't necessarily think that just because someone else has the PTSD diagnosis, for example, a healthcare worker who was on the front lines of the pandemic and experienced a totally different kind of stress, and it doesn't necessarily have the same whatever we call PTSD that these veterans who have mild traumatic brain injuries have. And so I think we still don't have a good framework to understand and to translate what it is that Ibogaine's doing. And so the best way that I think we have is just to listen really deeply to people's stories. Because we don't have the medicalized framework of psychiatry. It hasn't really been translated fully into a medical science yet. So I think that Ibogaine has naturally formed, and I think if you start to go out and to explore what is in the media about Ibogaine and what breaks through, it is usually very powerful personal stories. Like there's a movie In Waves and War on Netflix now. And they did a good job because they focused very strongly on personal the experience of the people who were going through. And so I think it's that. I think it's seeing it like that. And part of the reason is because healing is a journey that's not always clean. And so it's not like this is a treatment for MTBI or PTSD or something. It's a deeply profound, extensive journey that people had to go on. And so I think we almost still need that very personal framework to understand what it takes and whether it's something that is calling us.
I really appreciate what you're saying. Is like it takes more holistic approach. I often say that the healing is not a straight line, right? It doesn't mean you're gonna go through one ketamine session or 6 ketamine sessions and things gonna change and your depression is gonna disappear. Or like in my personal case, I struggled with eating disorder and I had an ayahuasca experience and it did heal the eating disorder in one ceremony. But there was obviously the traumatic experiences underneath it to begin with, and then led to panic attacks and it just the nervous system imbalance, right? So it's you heal one thing, but it doesn't mean all of the sudden you can just be like, all great, I'm all healed. It's very much not like that. And I feel like the healing journey just started after my first plant medicine 15 years ago. And it took so many other variety of alternative modalities to actually go through healing. And it's definitely a journey, and the journey that you can never put the time frame on. So really, and removing the labels also helpful, because DSM it's helpful to some degree, right? We have to have a frame of reference, of course. We have to have a certain language around what we're working with, and I think using it as a reference can be very helpful. You know, if we say that there is a depression, it can actually maybe help someone to get a certain piece with some clarity,
Yes.
right? Like I personally experienced that. Oh, you mean this was a bulimia? Great. Like, yes, it is
Yes.
a label, but it helped because for years I didn't have a language to it. I didn't know what's happening. I knew something weird is happening, but and I'm struggling. So I believe like there is a room for, you know, the naming, but if we identify too strongly with this labeling is not helpful, number one, and also as exactly precisely as you mentioned, one definition is not going to fit all. The PTSD
Yeah.
of one person's experience are not the same as the PTSD to the people that are happening in the war environment, and even within same environment, it is a different experience. So yeah, thank you for that. And if people want to find you, where would be one place they can look at digitally?
Well, the best place would be our website. You can find us at ambio.life.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much
Thanks
for
for
this
the
time
opportunity.
together. Really appreciate it, and I'm excited to hear you talk tomorrow.
Thank you.
Yes,
Yeah.
thank you. Hope you get some rest.